They laughed at her theory until the billionaire got worse. In a luxury hospital suite in Chicago, 20 of the best doctors in the country are watching a billionaire slip away, and none of them know why. Machines fail. Tests come back empty. But in the corner of the room, a quiet housekeeper notices something no one else does. A smell, a detail, a pattern. And what she sees will force an entire hospital to face the one truth they all missed. The private wing of St. Matthew's Medical Center didn't look like a hospital. It looked like money. Soft amber lighting replaced the harsh glare of fluorescence. Polished wood panels covered the walls, hiding machines that quietly blinked and breathed. Even the air felt filtered, controlled, expensive. But nothing in that room could stop a man from dying. Richard Whitmore lay motionless in the center of it all. At 68, the tech billionaire had built empires out of code and instinct. He had turned ideas into industries, failures into fortunes. Men like him weren't supposed to fade like this, slowly, quietly, without answers. A machine beside him let out a steady rhythm of beeps, each one softer than the last. His skin had taken on a pale, uneven tone, like something underneath was draining him, piece by piece. His fingers twitched occasionally, but not with purpose, just the body remembering how to move. Around him stood 20 of the best medical minds in the country. White coats, expensive watches, diplomas from places people spoke about with reverence. Dr. Alan Reynolds stood at the foot of the bed, arms folded tightly across his chest. He had the look of a man who was not used to being wrong, and didn't know what to do now that he might be. "We've ruled out infection," one specialist said quietly, flipping through a digital chart. Autoimmune panels came back inconclusive. "Neurological decline is accelerating," another added, "but it doesn't match any known progression pattern." Reynolds exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. "Run the full panel again. Everything. I want nothing missed." "We already," I said again. No one argued after that. They scattered, murmuring in low tones, frustration buried beneath professionalism. Every test had been done. Every scan reviewed twice. Blood work, imaging, consultations across 3 states. Nothing. And yet the man was still slipping away. In the far corner of the room, unnoticed by all of them, Lena Brooks pushed a mop across the polished floor. She moved quietly, deliberately, like someone who had learned long ago that being invisible was safer than being seen. Her uniform was clean but worn at the edges, the name tag slightly crooked where the pin had loosened over time. Lena. 43 years old. Night shift. 2 jobs. One small apartment in Southside Chicago where the heat clicked too loud in winter and the windows never quite shut all the way. But none of that mattered here. Here, she was just the cleaning staff. "Try not to get in the way," one of the younger doctors muttered as he stepped around her, barely glancing down. Lena nodded without looking up. "Yes, sir." She didn't take it personally anymore, or at least, that's what she told herself. Her mop glided across the floor, catching the reflection of the bed, the machines, the white coats moving in restless patterns. She had cleaned this room every night for the past week. Same faces, same tension, same unanswered questions. But tonight felt different. She slowed her movement just slightly as she passed closer to the bed. Something about the air felt off. At first, she thought it was just the usual mix: antiseptic, sterile plastic, the faint trace of expensive cologne that lingered in the room long after visiting hours ended. But underneath that, there was something else. Faint, sharp, metallic. Her hand paused on the mop handle. She inhaled again, slower this time. There it was. Not strong enough for most people to notice. Not something you'd catch unless you were paying attention, unless you knew what to look for. Lena's eyes lifted, almost without her realizing it. They landed on Richard Whitmore's hands. She had seen them every night, resting still against the white sheets. But now, with her attention sharpened, she noticed something she hadn't fully processed before. The color of his fingernails. Not just pale. Wrong. A subtle yellowing, uneven, like something internal was pushing outward. Not staining, not age. Something chemical. Her grip tightened slightly on the mop. She took a step closer, careful, silent. No one stopped her. No one even noticed. The doctors were too busy chasing answers in charts and data. Machines hummed. A nurse adjusted a line near the IV, her focus locked on numbers on a screen. Lena leaned just enough to see more clearly. His hair. Thinner than it should have been. Not in the way of aging, but in patches. Uneven loss. Breakage, almost. Like something had weakened it at the root. Her heartbeat picked up. She had seen patterns like this before. Not here, not in this life. But a long time ago in a lecture hall that smelled like chalk dust and ambition, when she still believed she would become something else. Back when she had sat in the front row, taking notes faster than the professor could speak. Back when people had listened to her. A voice cut through her thoughts. Ms. Brooks. She straightened immediately. Dr. Reynolds was looking at her now, his expression polite but distant. We'll need this area clear for the next round of tests. Yes, sir, Lena said quickly, stepping back. Her eyes dropped again, the invisible barrier snapping back into place. She resumed mopping, slower now, but her mind was no longer on the floor. It was on the man in the bed, on the color of his nails, on the pattern of his hair loss, on that faint metallic scent that didn't belong. Behind her, the doctors continued their discussion. If this were toxin-related, we'd have seen something in the initial screens, one of them said. Exactly, another replied. There's no evidence of external exposure. No evidence, Reynolds repeated, though there was less certainty in his voice now. Lena's jaw tightened just slightly. No evidence, or no one looking for the right thing. She moved toward the small bathroom area attached to the suite, pushing her cart quietly along the wall. Inside, the lights were softer, reflecting off marble countertops and chrome fixtures. Everything was immaculate, almost too perfect. Her eyes scanned the space out of habit. Folded towels, glassware untouched. A line of personal care items arranged neatly near the sink. That's when she saw it. A small jar. Black, sleek, expensive. Placed carefully, almost deliberately, near the edge of the counter. Lena paused. She didn't touch it. Not yet. But something about it stayed with her. Behind her, in the main room, a monitor beeped faster for a brief moment before stabilizing again. Voices rose slightly, tension tightening like a wire pulled too far. Lena stepped back out, her cart rolling softly over the floor. No one looked at her, no one asked what she saw, no one thought to. She was just the woman who cleaned the room. But as she passed the bed one more time, her eyes lingered. And this time she wasn't just noticing, she was connecting. The smell, the symptoms, the silence in the data where something should have been. Her chest rose slowly as a thought formed, quiet, dangerous, impossible to ignore. If the doctors couldn't save him, then what was she starting to see? And why did it feel like the answer had been sitting in this room all along? The monitor beeped again. steady, but fragile. Like time was running out. And Lena Brooks, the woman no one saw, was the only one beginning to understand why. By the time her shift ended, the sky outside had turned that dull gray-blue Chicago war before sunrise, the kind of light that didn't warm anything, the kind that made the city feel tired before the day even began. Lena stepped out of street. Matthews through the employee entrance, pulling her coat tighter around her. The cold cut through the fabric like it had something personal against her. Her breath came out in soft clouds as she walked past the loading dock, past the row of dented trash bins, past the security guard who barely looked up from his phone. "Night," she said quietly. He nodded without meeting her eyes. That was normal. Everything about her life was normal, in the kind of way that meant invisible. Her bus stop sat 3 blocks away, under a flickering streetlight that buzzed like it was on its last breath. A man in a construction jacket stood there already, hands buried deep in his pockets. He didn't look at her. She didn't look at him. People like them didn't ask questions. They just got through the day. When the bus finally came, it groaned to a stop like it was just as exhausted as the people getting on. Lena dropped into a seat near the back, her body finally giving in to the weight it had been carrying all night. But her mind didn't rest. It went right back to that room, to Richard Whitmore, to the color of his nails, to the smell. Her fingers curled slightly against her coat as she stared out the window, watching the city slide past in streaks of cold light and shadow. "You thinking too hard this early?" the driver called out casually, glancing at her through the mirror. Lena blinked, caught off guard. "Sorry?" "You got that look," he said with a half smile, "like you're solving something nobody asked you to solve." She let out a small breath. "Just tired." "Yeah," he said. "Ain't we all?" He didn't press further. Nobody ever did. That was the thing about being invisible. People didn't expect answers from you. They didn't expect anything at all. Her stop came 20 minutes later south side, the kind of neighborhood where the buildings leaned just a little too far and the sidewalks cracked like they'd given up years ago. A neon sign from a corner store flickered red against the early morning gloom. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, then faded into nothing. Lena climbed the narrow stairs to her apartment, the wood creaking under each step like it knew her routine by heart. Inside, the air was colder than it should have been. The heater clicked, struggling to keep up. She didn't bother turning on the overhead light. Instead, she moved straight to the kitchen, flipping on the small lamp above the sink. A soft yellow glow filled the room, casting long shadows across the chipped counter. Her shoes came off first, then her coat. For a moment, she just stood there. Still. Quiet. But her mind kept moving. She reached into the top cabinet and pulled down a worn notebook. The cover was bent at the corners, pages filled with notes written in tight, careful handwriting. Formulas, diagrams, fragments of a life she had paused but never fully let go. She opened it. Her fingers hovered for a second before she turned to a blank page. "Metallic odor," she murmured softly, writing the words down. Yellowing nails, hair loss, neurological decline. The pen moved faster now, muscle memory taking over. Possible causes. Her breath slowed as she thought. Not guessing, not hoping, thinking. The way she used to. Back when she sat in lecture halls instead of cleaning floors. Back when people asked her questions and waited for her answers. She stopped writing for a moment, her eyes narrowing slightly. "No," she whispered. That didn't fit. She scratched out a line, then another. The heater clicked again, louder this time. Her gaze drifted to the small window above the sink. Outside, the sky had lightened just enough to reveal the outline line of the buildings across the street. Another day was starting. Another shift would come soon enough. But Richard Whitmore might not make it to see the end of it. Lena's jaw tightened. She flipped back a few pages in the notebook, scanning older notes. Toxicology, heavy metals, absorption pathways. Her finger stopped on a section she hadn't looked at in years. A diagram. Simple, clear, dangerous. Her heart gave a small, sharp beat. No, she said again, softer this time. That's not... But the thought didn't go away. It settled in. Quiet. Persistent. She closed the notebook slowly, pressing her palm against the cover like she could hold the idea inside. Across town, in a room built to save lives, 20 doctors were running tests that told them nothing. And here she was, standing in a kitchen with peeling paint and a broken heater, seeing something they didn't. Lena let out a long breath and rubbed her eyes. You're tired, she told herself. That's all this is. But even as she said it, she knew better. Because the pattern, it felt familiar. Too familiar. A knock sounded faintly from the wall. Her neighbor, Mr. Harris, probably heading out for his early shift. The pipes groaned in response. Life moved on, as it always did. But Lena stayed where she was. Still. Thinking. Because if she was right, if even part of what she was starting to see made sense, then this wasn't just a mystery. It was something worse. Something no one in that hospital was even looking for. And the man in that bed didn't have time for them to figure it out. Lena picked up the notebook again, her grip firmer now. She wasn't supposed to be part of this. She wasn't supposed to have an opinion. She definitely wasn't supposed to be right. But as she looked down at the page, one thought pushed through everything else. What happens when the only person who sees the truth is the one nobody listens to? Outside, the sun finally broke through the gray. And somewhere across the city, a machine kept beeping. Slower, softer, running out of time. The words stayed with Lena long after she left her apartment that evening. By the time she returned to St. Matthew's, the city had slipped back into darkness. Rain had started falling, thin, steady, tapping against the glass doors of the hospital like a quiet warning no one was listening to. Inside, everything looked the same. Warm lighting, polished floors, controlled silence. But Lena felt different. She pushed her cart down the hallway of the private wing, the wheels humming softly beneath her hands. Her uniform was clean. Her movements were calm. To anyone watching, she was exactly what she always was. Unnoticed. But inside, her mind was sharper than it had been in years. She had replayed the symptoms over and over during the day. Every detail. Every inconsistency. And now, walking back into that room, she wasn't just observing anymore. She was looking for confirmation. The door to Richard Whitmore's suite stood slightly ajar. Voices drifted out. Low, tense. Liver function continues to decline, a doctor was saying. We're seeing neurological involvement now. That doesn't make sense, another replied. Not at this rate. Dr. Reynolds's voice cut through them both. Then find something that does. Lena stepped inside quietly. No one acknowledged her. No one ever did. She moved to the far side of the room, dipping her mop into the bucket with a soft splash. The smell of disinfectant rose up, sharp and clean, but beneath it, that same faint metallic edge. Stronger tonight. Her chest tightened. She kept her head down, but her eyes moved. Richard looked worse. The yellowing in his nails was more pronounced now. His hands rested limp against the sheets, veins faintly visible beneath skin that seemed thinner than it should have been. His lips had lost color. Even the rise and fall of his chest felt uneven, like his body was forgetting its own rhythm. Lena swallowed. This wasn't random. This wasn't some unknown disease no one could name. This was a pattern, and patterns meant something. A nurse stepped forward to adjust the IV, her movements quick, practiced. We're increasing fluids again. It won't matter if we don't know what we're treating, one of the specialists muttered under his breath. Lena's grip tightened slightly on the mop handle. Exactly. Her gaze shifted, almost instinctively, toward the bathroom. The door was half open. She moved toward it, her cart following with a quiet roll. Inside, the lighting was softer, reflecting off marble and chrome. Everything was in place. Too perfect. Like a showroom instead of a space where someone was dying. Her eyes went straight to the counter. The black jar. Still there. Same position as before. Too deliberate. She stepped closer this time, still not touching it, just looking. The label was minimal, elegant, expensive, the kind of product people bought not because they needed it, but because it made them feel like they belonged somewhere higher. Lena leaned in slightly. There it was again, that faint metallic scent. Not strong, not obvious, but once you noticed it, you couldn't unnotice it. Her heartbeat picked up. She glanced over her shoulder. The doctors were still gathered around the bed, focused on charts and monitors. No one was paying attention to her. No one ever did. Slowly, carefully, Lena reached out. Her fingers hovered above the jar, then stopped. She pulled her hand back. Not yet. Her mind was moving too fast now. If she was right. No. She needed more. She turned back toward the main room, pushing her cart out of the bathroom. Her movements were steady, controlled, but inside everything felt like it was accelerating. A sudden shift in sound snapped her attention forward. The monitor. Faster now. Beeping sharper. A nurse's voice rose. His heart rate. Get me another reading, Dr. Reynolds said quickly, stepping closer. Now. Lena froze where she stood. For a moment, the entire room seemed to tighten. Machines adjusted. Hands moved faster. Voices overlapped in controlled urgency. But Lena wasn't looking at the monitors. She was looking at Richard's hands. The slight tremor. The way his fingers curled just barely, like something inside him was reacting. Like something had just been introduced into his system. Her eyes flicked back toward the bathroom. The jar. Her stomach dropped. No. No, that wasn't possible. Was it? The thought hit her so clearly it almost felt like someone had spoken it out loud. Absorption. Through the skin, slow, consistent. Her breath caught. That diagram from her notebook, the one she hadn't looked at in years, rose up in her mind with sudden clarity. Certain compounds didn't need to be ingested. They didn't need to be injected. They could pass through the skin. Build up over time. Cause damage that looked like something else entirely. Something scattered, something confusing, something that would keep 20 doctors chasing the wrong answers. Lena's heart pounded harder now. Her eyes moved again, this time not just observing, but connecting. The jar, the symptoms, the timing. Her gaze shifted back toward the group of doctors. "We may need to consider a full transfer to another facility," someone was saying. Reynolds shook his head. Moving him in this condition could kill him. Kill him. The word hung in the air. Lena took a step forward without meaning to. Just one. Small. But enough. A young doctor glanced at her, irritation flashing across his face. "Ma'am, we need space here." She stopped immediately. "Yes, sir." Her voice was quiet. Steady. Invisible again. She stepped back, but her mind didn't. Because now the possibility wasn't just a thought. It was forming into something solid, something dangerous. If she was right, then this wasn't just a medical failure. It was something intentional, something controlled, something happening right in front of all of them. And no one was seeing it. No one except her. Lena's eyes drifted back one last time to the bathroom, to the black jar sitting quietly on the counter. Unnoticed, unquestioned, just like her. A chill moved through her, deeper than the cold outside. Because if that jar was what she thought it was, then someone had been standing in this room, watching him get weaker, and helping it happen. The monitor beeped again. Sharper this time. More urgent. Lena turned away slowly, her hands gripping the cart. She was just the cleaning staff. She had no authority, no proof, no voice in that room. But as she walked toward the door, one thought settled deep in her chest, impossible to ignore now. What if the reason no one could save him was because no one was looking for the truth? And what if the only person who had seen it was the one they would never believe? The thought stayed with Lena as she stepped out of the suite that night. It didn't fade. It didn't soften. If anything, it grew louder. The hallway outside felt colder than before, even though the temperature hadn't changed. Nurses passed by with quick steps, their shoes tapping against the polished floor. A cart rattled somewhere in the distance. The hospital moved the way it always did, efficient, detached, controlled. But Lena's world had shifted. She pushed her cart forward slowly, her hands steady even as her thoughts raced. Poison. The word felt too heavy, too dangerous, and yet everything pointed there. Not a random toxin, not something accidental, something deliberate, something consistent. Her jaw tightened. She turned down the corner toward the nurses' station, where soft light spilled across a cluster of monitors and paperwork. Two nurses stood there, speaking in low voices, their faces drawn with the same exhaustion Lena had seen all week. "He's not responding," one of them said. "None of it's working." "We're running out of options," the other replied quietly. Lena stopped just short of the counter. She hadn't planned this. She hadn't rehearsed anything, but the words were already pushing forward. "Excuse me," she said. Both nurses looked up. For a second, there was confusion, like they were trying to place why she was speaking to them at all. "Yes," one of them said, polite but distant. Lena swallowed. Her voice stayed calm. "I think there might be something else going on with Mr. Whitmore." The air shifted. Not dramatically. Just enough. The second nurse tilted her head slightly. "What do you mean?" Lena hesitated for half a second. Then she said it. "The symptoms. They don't look like a disease, they look like exposure." A pause. The first nurse blinked. Exposure to what? Lena glanced down, then back up. Something chemical, something absorbed over time. The nurses exchanged a look. Not hostile, not yet, just uncertain. "You're saying he's been poisoned?" the second nurse asked, her tone cautious. Lena nodded once. "I'm not sure exactly what, but—" "Okay," the first nurse cut in gently, raising a hand. "I understand you're trying to help, but this case is being handled by the top specialists in the building." "I know," Lena said quickly. "I just thought maybe if someone— Ms. Brooks, right?" the second nurse said, glancing at her name tag. "Yes." The nurse gave a small, tight smile. "We appreciate your concern, but if there were signs of something like that, the doctors would have caught it." Lena's chest tightened. "They might not be looking for it," she said quietly. The words hung there longer than she expected. The first nurse's expression shifted slightly now, something closer to discomfort. "Look," she said, lowering her voice, "you really shouldn't be speculating about medical conditions, especially not in a case like this." "I'm not speculating," Lena said, her voice barely above a whisper now. "I'm— Lena." The name came from behind her. Sharp. Controlled. She turned. Dr. Reynolds stood a few steps away, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. The nurses stepped back immediately, as if the air itself had changed direction. Reynolds walked closer, his eyes fixed on Lena. "Is there a reason you're discussing this case with my staff?" he asked. His tone wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. Lena felt every word land. "I was just—" "This is a restricted case," he continued, cutting her off. "There are protocols in place for a reason." "I understand," she said quickly. "I just noticed—" "You noticed," he repeated, his gaze narrowing slightly. For a brief moment, something flickered in his eyes. Not curiosity. Something closer to disbelief. Then it was gone. "Miss Brooks," he said, his voice calmer now but colder. "I need you to focus on your assigned duties." Lena nodded. "Yes, sir." He held her gaze for another second, as if deciding whether to say more. Then he turned and walked away. Just like that. The conversation was over. The nurses returned to their station, their attention shifting back to charts and monitors. One of them gave Lena a quick glance, half apology, half warning. Lena stood there for a moment longer, still, invisible again. Her hands tightened slightly around the handle of her cart. She had said it. She had tried. And it hadn't changed anything. She turned away slowly and began moving down the hallway. Step by step. The wheels of the cart echoed softly against the floor. Her chest felt heavier now. Not because she doubted herself, but because she understood something even worse. It didn't matter if she was right. Not here. Not like this. Because in this building, knowledge didn't matter if it didn't come from the right person. Her footsteps slowed as she passed a glass window overlooking the city. Rain streaked down the surface, blurring the lights outside into long, trembling lines. Somewhere behind her, a monitor alarm went off again, sharp, insistent. Voices rose. Quick, urgent. Lena didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She already knew. He was getting worse. And no one was changing course. No one was asking the question that mattered. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass. Uniform. Tired eyes. A woman who cleaned up after everyone else. A woman no one listened to. Her throat tightened. "You tried," she whispered under her breath. But the words didn't feel true. Because deep down, she knew she hadn't really tried yet. Not the way it would take. Not the way that would make them listen. That would cost something. More than a conversation. More than a warning. She closed her eyes for a moment, the sound of rain tapping steadily against the glass. When she opened them again, something had changed. The hesitation was still there. The fear, too. But underneath it, there was something stronger. A decision forming. If they wouldn't look for the truth, then she would have to bring it to them. Not as a suggestion, not as a guess. As proof, her grip on the cart steadied. She turned away from the window and walked back down the hallway, her pace a little more certain now. Because somewhere in that room, a man was dying. And the only person who could stop it was the one they had just told to stay in her place. The question wasn't whether she was right anymore. It was whether she was willing to risk everything to prove it. The decision didn't come all at once. It settled in slowly, like cold seeping through a wall. By the time Lena finished her shift that night, the hospital had grown quieter. The kind of quiet that didn't mean peace, just exhaustion. The machines still hummed. The lights still glowed, but fewer voices filled the hallways now. Most people had gone home. She hadn't. Not yet. Lena stood outside Richard Whitmore's room again, her cart parked neatly against the wall. Through the narrow glass panel, she could see the same scene unfolding inside. Doctors, monitors, movement. And Richard, still slipping. She rested her hand lightly on the cart handle, her fingers tapping once, twice, as if keeping time with the machines inside. You could walk away, she told herself. Finish your shift. Go home. Sleep. Come back tomorrow, and let this be someone else's problem. That's what people expected her to do. That's what someone in her position was supposed to do. A nurse passed by, giving her a quick nod. You heading out soon? In a minute, Lena said. The nurse smiled faintly and kept walking. No questions, no pressure. That was the thing about being invisible. No one expected you to carry weight. But Lena couldn't move. Because every time she tried to turn away, she saw his hands again. The color, the tremor, the pattern. Her chest tightened. She pushed the cart forward and stepped into the room. No one stopped her. No one even looked. She moved quietly, starting near the far wall, wiping down surfaces that were already clean. Her cloth glided over polished wood, over glass, over the edges of machines that cost more than her entire building. Routine. Safe. Invisible. But her eyes kept drifting. To Richard. To the IV line. To the slight twitch in his fingers. And then, to the chair beside the bed. It wasn't empty tonight. A man sat there. Mid-50s, clean cut. Expensive suit that didn't belong in a hospital, but somehow still looked like it owned the room. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes were sharp, watching everything. Daniel Reeves. Lena recognized him immediately. He'd been here before. Not every night, but often enough. Always calm, always composed, and always bringing something. Tonight, it was the same black jar. It sat on the bedside table, placed just a little too carefully, like it mattered where it was, like it was part of something. Daniel leaned forward slightly, speaking in a low voice Lena couldn't fully hear. You're going to get through this, he was saying. You always do. His tone was warm, convincing, but something about it felt practiced. Lena slowed her movements. Her cloth paused against the surface she was wiping. Daniel reached for the jar, unscrewed the lid, and dipped his fingers inside. Lena's breath caught. He rubbed a small amount between his hands, then gently took Richard's hand, lifting it slightly, and began applying the cream. Slow, deliberate, like it was something he had done many times before. No one questioned it. A nurse glanced over, then looked away. Just a concerned associate, helping. Just another act of care. Lena's pulse started to rise. Her eyes locked onto the motion. Skin-to-skin transfer, absorption. Her mind filled in the rest before she could stop it. Daniel finished, setting Richard's hand back down carefully. He closed the jar, placing it exactly where it had been. Precise. Controlled. He sat back in the chair, watching the monitors with quiet patience. Lena forced herself to move again, to keep cleaning, to stay invisible. But everything inside her was screaming now. This wasn't random. This wasn't a possibility. This was happening. Right here. Right now. She moved toward the bathroom, her steps measured, her expression neutral. Inside, she gripped the edge of the counter for a second, her breath coming faster than she wanted. You saw it. You know what that means. Her reflection stared back at her in the mirror. Tired eyes, tight jaw. Fear. Not just of being wrong, but of being right. Because if she was right, then that man sitting calmly by the bed, that man speaking gently, was doing something no one else in the room could even imagine. Lena closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again. She turned back toward the door. When she stepped out, nothing had changed on the surface. The doctors were still working. The monitors still beeped. Daniel still sat there, composed, watching. And Lena picked up a blanket that had slipped slightly from Richard's side. She stepped closer to the bed. No one stopped her. No one questioned her. She adjusted the blanket gently, pulling it up just enough to cover his shoulder. Her hand lingered for half a second. Warmth. Faint. Still there. You're not alone, she whispered under her breath. So quiet no one could hear it. She didn't know why she said it. Maybe for him. Maybe for herself. Then she stepped back. Back into her place, back into the background. Daniel's eyes flicked toward her for the briefest moment. Not recognition. Not suspicion. Just a glance. The kind you give furniture when it shifts slightly. Then he looked away. Dismissed. Lena turned and walked out of the room, her cart rolling softly beside her. The hallway felt longer now. Heavier. Every step carried more weight than the last. Because this wasn't just a theory anymore. This wasn't something she could ignore. She had seen it. With her own eyes. And no one else had. Not the nurses, not the doctors, not the man whose life depended on it. Lena stopped near the end of the corridor, her hand tightening around the cart handle. Her heart was pounding now. Loud, insistent. She could still walk away. Pretend she hadn't noticed. Let the system do what it was already doing. Let the outcome be what it was heading toward. But then she saw it again. Richard's hand. The way it moved when the cream touched his skin. And something inside her locked into place. This wasn't about being right. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about stopping something that shouldn't be happening. A man was dying. and the person doing it was sitting right beside him. Lena took a slow breath, then another. Her mind moved quickly now. Not fear, not doubt. Focus. She didn't need their permission. She didn't need their approval. She needed proof. Something they couldn't ignore. Something that would force them to see what she already knew. Her grip on the cart loosened, just slightly. Enough to let her think clearly. Because if she was going to do this, she had to do it carefully. Quietly. The way she had learned to do everything else in her life. Invisible. But precise. Lena turned back toward the room one last time. The door was still slightly open. The light inside still warm. The scene still unchanged. Except now, she understood it. And once you understood something like that, you couldn't pretend you didn't. The question wasn't whether she would act anymore. It was how far she was willing to go, to make them finally see the truth. Lena didn't go home right away that morning. She couldn't. The city was waking up around her. Cars filling the streets, lights flickering on in apartment windows. But none of it felt real. Her mind was still back in that room, replaying every movement, every detail. Daniel's hand. The cream. The timing. She sat on the edge of her bed, her coat still on, staring at nothing. If you do this, there's no going back. The thought came quietly, but it stayed. Because this wasn't just about being ignored anymore. This was about stepping into something she had no right, no permission to touch. Her job, her income, her stability. All of it could disappear with one wrong move. Lena leaned forward, elbows on her knees, hands clasped tight. You already know, she whispered to herself. And she did. Walking away wasn't an option anymore. Not after what she had seen. Not after what she understood. She stood slowly and crossed to the small cabinet above her sink. From the back, she pulled out an old plastic container, something she hadn't opened in years. Inside were pieces of a life she had put on hold. Old lab notes, a cracked pair of safety goggles, a small portable testing kit, basic, outdated, but still functional. She ran her fingers over it gently, like greeting something familiar after a long absence. I might need you, she said under her breath. Hours later, the sky had turned gray again when Lena stepped back into St. Matthew's. Her shift hadn't officially started yet. That was the point. Fewer people, less attention. The lobby was quieter than usual. A receptionist glanced up as Lena walked in, then went back to her screen. No questions, no second look. Lena moved quickly, but without urgency. Invisible. She took the service elevator up to the private wing. The doors opened with a soft chime, revealing a hallway that felt almost too still. Good. That's what she needed. She pushed her cart forward, her movements controlled, her expression neutral. Every step was deliberate, because now, she wasn't just cleaning, she was looking for proof. When she reached Richard Whitmore's room, the door was closed. A small sign hung beside it, limited access, authorized personnel only. Lena stared at it for a moment, then she glanced down the hallway. Empty. She knocked softly. No answer. Her heart began to beat faster. She reached for the handle and turned it. The room was dimmer than before, curtains partially drawn, machines still humming, but fewer voices, fewer people. Richard lay in the bed, unchanged. maybe worse. A nurse stood near the far side, adjusting something on a monitor. She looked up briefly as Lena entered. "Oh, didn't know they scheduled cleaning this early," she said. "Just a quick pass," Lena replied calmly. "Won't take long." The nurse nodded, distracted. "Go ahead." Lena moved inside, her cart following. She started where she always did, slow, routine motions, wiping surfaces that didn't need wiping. But her eyes were already searching. The bedside table, the chair, the IV stand, and then the bathroom. She made her way toward it, her breathing steady, her steps light. Inside, everything was exactly as she had left it. And there it was, the black jar, waiting. Lena closed the bathroom door halfway behind her. Not fully. Just enough. Her hand moved to the pocket of her uniform, fingers brushing against the small container she had brought with her. This was it. No turning back. She reached for the jar. This time she didn't hesitate. Her fingers closed around it, lifting it slowly, carefully. It felt heavier than she expected. Cool, solid. She unscrewed the lid just slightly, enough to see inside. The cream looked normal, smooth, pale, harmless. But Lena knew better. She dipped the tip of a cotton swab into it, just enough to gather a small sample. No more. Her hands were steady. Years ago, she had done this kind of work without thinking. Now, every movement carried risk. She sealed the sample in the small container and slipped it back into her pocket. Then she closed the jar, set it back exactly where it had been. Same angle, same position, like nothing had happened. Lena exhaled slowly. But she didn't move right away. Because something else had caught her attention. A faint residue on the inside rim of the jar, almost invisible, unless you knew to look for it. She leaned closer, her eyes narrowing. There. A slight discoloration. Not part of the product. Something added. Something that didn't belong. Her chest tightened. This was real. All of it. A sound behind her made her freeze. Footsteps. Close. She turned just as the bathroom door opened wider. Daniel Reeves stood there. For a split second, neither of them spoke. His eyes moved quickly, from her face to the jar to her hands, then back again. Lena felt her pulse spike, but she forced herself to stay still. Calm. Invisible. "Didn't realize anyone was in here," Daniel said, his tone smooth, but his gaze sharper now. "Just cleaning," Lena replied. Her voice didn't shake. She made sure of that. Daniel stepped slightly into the doorway, his presence filling the space in a way that felt intentional. "You work nights, right?" he asked. "Yes, sir." He nodded slowly. His eyes lingered just a second longer than they should have. Then he smiled. Polite. Empty. "Well," he said, stepping back, "carry on." Lena nodded once and moved past him, her cart rolling ahead of her. She didn't look back. Not once. But she could feel his eyes on her. Following. Measuring. When she stepped out into the hallway, the air felt different, thinner. She kept walking. Steady. Controlled. Only when she turned the corner did she allow herself to breathe fully again. Her hand slipped into her pocket, touching the small container. Proof. Not yet confirmed. But closer. So much closer. Behind her, in that room, a man was still dying. And somewhere between what she had just taken And what she was about to find out was the truth they had all missed. Lena slowed her steps just slightly. Because now, it wasn't just about proving something. It was about surviving long enough to show it. Lena didn't stop walking until she reached the end of the service corridor. Only then did she lean her card against the wall, her hand still pressed inside her pocket, fingers curled around the small container like it might disappear if she let go. Her heart hadn't slowed down yet. It wouldn't. Not after that moment in the bathroom. Not after the way Daniel had looked at her. Not just a glance, not just dismissal. Something else. Something sharper. He noticed. The realization settled into her chest like a weight. He noticed something. Maybe not everything. Maybe not the sample. But enough. Lena closed her eyes for a brief second, forcing herself to breathe. In, out, low. Controlled. You did what you had to do. Now you finish it. She pushed off the wall and started moving again, her steps steady, her posture unchanged. Anyone passing by would see the same thing they always saw. A cleaning worker finishing her route. Nothing more. Nothing worth remembering. But Lena was counting every second now, because she knew something else. If she had seen the truth, then whoever was behind it would eventually realize someone else had too. And people who did things like this didn't leave loose ends. The thought stayed with her as she moved through the rest of her shift. She cleaned 2 more rooms, wiped down empty hallways, replaced supplies no one noticed were low. Routine. Normal. Safe. But underneath it all, her mind was already moving ahead. What next? The answer came quickly. Test it. Confirm it. Make it undeniable. That was the only way. By the time her shift ended, the sky outside had shifted again, dark clouds rolling in low over the city, the promise of another storm building quietly. Chicago didn't wait for anyone. Neither could she. Back in her apartment, Lena locked the door behind her and stood still for a moment, listening. Nothing. Just the low hum of the building, the distant sound of a television through the wall. Normal. She moved to the kitchen table and laid everything out. The container. The old kit. Her notebook. Her hands were steady now. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because she had crossed the line already. There was no point in hesitation anymore. She opened the container and took a small sample with a clean swab, transferring it carefully into a makeshift testing tray. Her movements were precise. Measured. Years had passed since she'd done this in any formal setting, but the knowledge hadn't left her. It had just been waiting. The test itself was simple, not definitive, but enough to point in a direction. She mixed the reagents slowly, watching the solution change. Clear, then slightly cloudy, then a faint shift. Subtle, but unmistakable. Lena leaned closer, her breath held. There it was. A reaction. Not random, not contamination. A pattern she recognized. Her chest tightened. No, she whispered. But she already knew. Heavy metal. Something rare. Something that wouldn't show up easily in standard tests. Something that required someone to be looking for it. Her mind raced now, pulling pieces together faster than she could stop it. The symptoms, the delivery method, the timing, Daniel. The cream. Her hand dropped to the table, fingers pressing against the surface. This isn't just exposure, she said softly. This is controlled, intentional. The word didn't need to be spoken. It was already there. Lena sat back slowly, the chair creaking under her weight. For a moment, everything felt very quiet. Too quiet. Because now the truth wasn't a theory anymore. It wasn't a possibility. It was real. And that changed everything. Her eyes moved to the window, where rain had started to fall again, tapping against the glass in steady, relentless patterns. She should go to the police. The thought came quickly. Logical. Safe. But just as quickly, she knew it wouldn't work. Not without proof they couldn't dismiss. Not without something stronger than a homemade test and a suspicion from a cleaning worker. They'd ask questions, credentials, authority, things she didn't have, things that would make it easy to ignore her, or worse, to dismiss her completely. Lena exhaled slowly. No, she said. This had to be done inside, at the source, where the truth couldn't be redirected. Her gaze dropped back to the table, to the sample, to the evidence she had now. It wasn't enough yet, but it was a start. A dangerous one. A knock sounded suddenly at her door. Sharp, unexpected. Lena froze. Her heart jumped into her throat. No one visited. Not like this. Not unannounced. The knock came again. Slower this time. Deliberate. Her eyes moved toward the door, then back to the table. The sample. The kit. Everything laid out in plain sight. She stood quickly, gathering the materials, moving them into the cabinet without a sound. Another knock. Ms. Brooks. A man's voice. Calm. Professional. Lena's stomach dropped. She stepped closer to the door, but didn't open it yet. Yes? She called out, her voice steady. We just need to ask you a few questions about your shift earlier. Security. Of course. Too soon. Her hand rested on the doorknob. For a moment she considered not opening it, but that would only make things worse. She turned the handle. The door opened just enough to reveal a man in a dark jacket, hospital ID clipped to his chest. His expression was neutral, but his eyes were searching. Ms. Lena Brooks? He asked. Yes. I'm with hospital security. We've had a report that you may have been accessing restricted areas outside your assigned duties. Lena felt the weight of the words settle in low. Heavy. I was cleaning, she said simply. The man nodded slightly. I'm sure you were, but we need you to come in and clarify a few things. Not a request. Not really. Lena glanced past him, down the hallway. Empty, quiet. No witnesses. Her heart began to pound again. Faster this time. Different. Because this wasn't about suspicion anymore. This was about control. Someone had noticed. Someone had acted. And now, she was being pulled into it. She stepped back from the door. Let me grab my coat, she said. The man nodded. Of course. Lena turned away, her mind moving faster than ever. They were already watching. Already asking questions. And she hadn't even shown them what she knew yet. Her hand brushed against the cabinet where she had hidden the sample. Still there. Still safe. For now. She picked up her coat slowly, slipping it on. When she turned back, her face was calm, composed, invisible. But inside, everything had changed. Because now she understood something she hadn't fully grasped before. This wasn't just about proving the truth. It was about staying one step ahead of someone who would do anything to make sure that truth never came out. The hallway outside Lena's apartment felt colder than before. Not because of the weather, because of what it meant. She stepped out, pulling the door shut behind her, the soft click echoing louder than it should have. The security officer walked beside her without speaking, his pace measured, his presence steady but firm. Lena didn't ask questions. She already knew. This wasn't routine. This was containment. They walked down the narrow stairwell, footsteps echoing against the concrete walls. Outside, the rain had picked up, streaking the street in silver lines under flickering streetlights. The officer opened the passenger door of a dark sedan. "After you," he said. Lena paused for half a second, just enough to breathe. Then she got in. The drive back to St. Matthew's was quiet. Too quiet. The city blurred past the window, neon signs, empty intersections, the occasional late-night diner glowing like a refuge no one had time to enter. Lena's reflection stared back at her in the glass. Calm. Still. Invisible. But inside, her thoughts were sharp, moving fast. They're already watching. Which meant one thing. Daniel knew something was off. Maybe not everything, but enough to act. The car pulled into the hospital's private entrance, bypassing the main lobby entirely. The officer led her through a side corridor, one she had cleaned 100 times but never walked through like this. Not as someone being brought in. The door at the end of the hall opened into a small, sterile room. A table, 2 chairs, a camera in the corner. Lena stepped inside. The officer gestured. "Have a seat." She sat. He remained standing for a moment, then closed the door behind him. Another man entered shortly after, older, dressed in a tailored suit that marked him as something above standard security. Hospital administration. He didn't introduce himself right away. Instead, he studied her. Measured. Like she was a problem he needed to define. "Ms. Brooks," he said finally, sitting across from her. "Thank you for coming in." Lena nodded. "You said there were questions." "There are," he replied, "about your movements earlier today." Her hands rested calmly in her lap. "I was working," she said. "Yes," he said, "in an area that has restricted access. I clean that floor every night." He leaned forward slightly, but not the patient's private suite during unscheduled hours. Lena met his gaze. "I was asked to check something. Not a lie, not entirely." The man's eyes narrowed just a fraction. "By whom?" Lena didn't answer right away. She let the silence stretch. Then she said, "A nurse." He leaned back, studying her again. "And while you were in the room, did you handle any patient belongings?" The question landed heavier. Direct. Targeted. Lena felt it, but her expression didn't change. "No," she said. The man held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly, as if filing that answer away. "Brooks," he said, his tone shifting, softer now, almost reasonable. "This is a very sensitive case. Mr. Whitmore is a high-profile patient. There are protocols in place for a reason." "I understand. I'm sure you do, which is why it's important that everyone stays within their role." The words were polite, but the message wasn't. "Stay in your place." Lena felt something tighten in her chest. Not fear, not exactly. Something deeper. Familiar. I always do my job, she said quietly. I'm sure you do, he replied, and we appreciate that. But if there's anything unusual, anything you think you've seen, it needs to go through proper channels. Lena's fingers pressed lightly together. Proper channels. The same ones that had already dismissed her. The same ones that were watching a man die. And if those channels aren't looking for the right thing? She asked. The man's expression shifted slightly. Not anger. Not yet. Just a flicker of something closer to irritation. They are, he said firmly. Lena held his gaze. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he smiled. Small, controlled. I think we're done here, he said, standing. You're free to go, but Miss Brooks. She stood as well. Yes? Be careful about stepping outside your responsibilities. It can create misunderstandings. A warning. Clear enough. Lena nodded once. I understand. But she didn't. Not in the way he wanted her to. Because as she walked out of that room, one thing became painfully clear. They weren't just protecting the patient. They were protecting the system. And the system didn't want her involved. Outside, the hallway felt different. Brighter. Sharper. Like everything had edges now. She walked past nurses, past doctors, past people who didn't look at her, didn't see her. But she saw them. Every detail, every movement. And now she saw something else. A pattern, a structure, a way things were kept quiet. Kept controlled. She reached the end of the corridor and stopped. Her hand slipped into her pocket, brushing against the empty space where the sample had been. Still hidden back at her apartment. Safe. For now. But not for long. Because if they were already questioning her, it meant time was shrinking. Faster than she thought. Her eyes drifted toward the direction of Richard's room. Somewhere down that hall, machines were still beeping, still slowing, still losing the fight. Lena closed her eyes for a moment. Just one. Then opened them again. Something inside her had shifted. Not fear, not doubt. Resolve. Because now she understood something she hadn't before. This wasn't just about proving the truth anymore. It was about getting it out, before it was buried. And the only way to do that was to stop waiting for permission. Lena turned and walked toward the exit. Not toward her shift. Not toward safety, but toward something riskier. Something final. Because the next time she spoke, she wouldn't be asking anyone to listen. She would be forcing them to. The rain had stopped by the time Lena stepped back into the hospital that night. The city outside still shimmered with wet reflections, streetlights stretching across asphalt like fractured gold, but inside St. Matthew's, everything was controlled again. Dry. Clean. Silent. Too silent. Lena walked through the main entrance this time. No service elevator. No side corridors. Her footsteps echoed faintly against the marble floor as she crossed the lobby, past the reception desk where a woman typed without looking up, past the waiting area where a man in a gray suit stared blankly at a muted television. No one stopped her. No one questioned her. That was the mistake they kept making. They thought silence meant safety. They thought invisibility meant obedience. But Lena had already stepped beyond that line. She pressed the elevator button with steady fingers. The doors opened. She stepped inside. And this time, she didn't feel small. The ride up was quiet, except for the soft hum of cables pulling her higher. Each floor passed with a muted chime. She didn't check her reflection. She didn't need to. She already knew who she was. When the doors opened onto the private wing, the atmosphere hit her immediately. Different. Tighter. Voices, low, urgent, carried from down the hall. Something was happening. Lena stepped out and walked toward the sound. Richard's room. The door was wide open. Inside, the scene had shifted from tension to crisis. Monitors were flashing. A nurse spoke quickly into a phone. Blood pressures dropping. No response to intervention. Dr. Reynolds stood at the bedside, his voice sharp and controlled. Increase oxygen. Prepare for another panel. Now, another panel. Another guess. Lena felt something inside her snap into clarity. This was it. There wasn't going to be another chance. She stepped forward. No cart. No cloth. No roll to hide behind. Just her. The movement caught someone's attention. A nurse turned. "Ma'am, you can't." But Lena didn't stop. She walked straight into the room. 20 heads didn't turn this time, but enough did. Enough to feel the shift. Dr. Reynolds looked up, irritation flashing instantly across his face. "What is this?" he said. "Ms. Brooks, you need to leave. He's being poisoned." The words landed in the room like a dropped glass. Sharp. Unexpected. Everything paused. Not completely. The machines kept beeping. The oxygen hissed. But the people, they froze. Reynolds stared at her. Disbelief. Then anger. "Excuse me?" Lena stepped closer, her hands steady at her sides. "I have proof," she said. A murmur rippled through the room. A few doctors exchanged glances. One of them let out a short, incredulous breath. "This is not the time for—" "The symptoms match," Lena continued, her voice firm now. "Hair loss, neurological decline, gastrointestinal stress. It's not random, it's cumulative." "Security," Reynolds began. "It's coming through the skin." That stopped him. Just for a second. Just enough. Lena saw it. The hesitation. The crack. She took another step forward. "The hand cream," she said. "The one that's brought in every day." Silence deepened. Now everyone was listening. Not because they believed her, but because something about the way she said it felt certain. One of the younger doctors, Dr. Patel, leaned forward slightly. "What are you suggesting?" he asked. Lena met his eyes. "That it's contaminated," she said, "with a heavy metal compound, something that builds slowly, something that standard tests might miss if you're not looking for it specifically." Reynolds shook his head, his expression hardening again. "That's absurd." "Then test it," Lena said immediately. The words came faster now, stronger. "Test the cream. Test his blood again. Targeted this time. Look for what you didn't look for before." "This is highly inappropriate," Reynolds snapped. "You have no authority." "I don't need authority," Lena said. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I just need to be right." The room went still again. Not because of her tone, because of her certainty. Reynolds opened his mouth, then stopped. Something shifted in his expression. A calculation, a risk. Because if she was wrong, this was nothing. But if she was right— Dr. Patel spoke again, quieter this time. "It wouldn't take long to run a targeted test," he said. "We could—" Reynolds looked at him sharply, then back at Lena, then at Richard. The monitors beeped again. Slower, fading. Time wasn't waiting for his pride. He exhaled sharply. "Fine," he said. "Run it." A nurse moved immediately, grabbing the jar from the bedside table. Lena watched as it changed hands, no longer invisible, no longer ignored. Now it was evidence. Now it mattered. Minutes stretched. Tests were prepared. Blood drawn again. Machines recalibrated. No one spoke to Lena, but no one told her to leave either. She stood there just inside the edge of the room, her heart pounding, her breath steady, waiting. The longest wait of her life. Dr. Patel stared at the preliminary screen as data began to populate. His brow furrowed, then tightened. "Wait," he said. Reynolds stepped closer. "What is it?" Patel didn't answer right away. He adjusted something, ran it again, then looked up. This doesn't make sense." "What?" Reynolds demanded. Patel turned the screen slightly. "Elevated levels," he said slowly, "consistent with heavy metal exposure." The words dropped into the room like a weight. Reynolds stared at the screen, then at Lena, then back again. "No," he said under his breath. But the data didn't change. It stayed there, clear, unmoving, undeniable. Behind them, a nurse gasped softly. Another doctor stepped closer. "It's real," he said. "How did we miss this?" No one answered, because they all knew they hadn't been looking. Lena didn't move, didn't speak. She just stood there, because the truth had finally spoken for her. And for the first time since she had walked into that hospital, they couldn't ignore it. No one spoke. Not at first. The machines kept running. The oxygen hissed. Rain tapped faintly against the distant windows. But inside that room, something had shifted so completely, it felt like the air itself had changed. Dr. Reynolds stood frozen, his eyes locked on the screen in front of him. Numbers didn't lie. They didn't bend for pride. They didn't soften for ego. They just stayed there. And now, they were saying something none of them had seen. Something a woman with no title, no degree on the wall, no authority, had walked in and named out loud. Reynolds swallowed once, hard. "Run it again," he said. His voice was quieter now, less certain. Dr. Patel nodded immediately, already moving. "It's already rerunning," he said, "but the pattern, it's consistent." Another doctor leaned in. "This level, this kind of accumulation, it doesn't happen overnight." "No," Patel said. "It builds." Lena didn't move. She stood exactly where she had been, just inside the edge of the room, her hands still at her sides. Invisible no longer, but not fully seen either. Not yet. A nurse stepped forward, her voice tight. "If this is correct, then we've been treating the wrong condition." No one answered her, because they all knew the answers. Reynolds turned slowly, his gaze shifting across the room, across his team, men and women who had trained for decades, who had built careers on certainty, now standing in the middle of something they had missed. "How?" one of them whispered, not accusing, not defensive, just lost. Lena felt something settle inside her, not satisfaction, not triumph, something quieter. He's still dying. That was the truth that mattered. She took a step forward. No one stopped her. "If you don't stop the source," she said, her voice steady but low, "it won't matter what treatment you give him." All eyes turned to her. Fully this time. Not dismissive, not irritated. Focused. Waiting. She met their gaze. "The cream," she said. "That's how it's getting into his system." A murmur moved through the room again. The nurse holding the jar looked down at it differently now, not as something harmless, but as something dangerous. Reynolds stared at Lena. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he nodded once. "Remove it," he said. The nurse didn't hesitate. She placed the jar into a sealed container, her movements quick and precise. Another nurse moved to wash Richard's hands, wiping away any remaining residue. The room shifted into motion again, but it wasn't the same motion as before. Before, they had been searching blindly. Now, they had direction. "Prepare chelation protocol," Reynolds said, his voice stronger now, but different, "and isolate all personal items." "Yes, doctor." Orders moved faster, sharper, more certain, because now they knew what they were fighting. Lena stepped back slightly, giving them space. She wasn't needed in the same way anymore, and she knew it. But she didn't leave. Not yet. Because something else still hadn't been said. Reynolds turned toward her again. His expression had changed. Not completely, but enough. "How did you see it?" he asked. The question wasn't loud, but it carried. Everyone in the room heard it. Lena held his gaze. She could have said a lot of things. About her past, about what she had studied, about everything she had given up. But none of that felt like the answer he needed. "I was paying attention," she said simply. The room went quiet again. Not the same silence as before. This one felt heavier, more personal. Reynolds nodded slowly, as if that answer made sense, as if it didn't. Both at the same time. A monitor beeped louder, different now. Stronger. Everyone turned. Richard's vitals had shifted, slightly, but enough to notice. "He's stabilizing," a nurse said, her voice filled with cautious hope. "Not saved, not yet, but no longer slipping as fast." Lena let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Her shoulders lowered just a fraction. Across the room, Dr. Patel looked back at her. There was something new in his expression. Not skepticism, not dismissal. Recognition. "You might have just saved his life," he said quietly. Lena shook her head once. "Not yet," she replied. Because she knew the truth. This wasn't over. Not until the person behind it was stopped. Not until the danger was fully gone. And as if the thought itself had weight, a voice spoke from the doorway. "Well, that's quite a development." The room turned. Daniel Reeves stood there. Calm, composed. Exactly as before. But now something about him felt different. Not because he had changed, because the room had, because Lena had. His eyes moved across the scene, the sealed container, the doctors, the tension. And finally, to Lena. For the first time, he really looked at her. Not past her, not through her, at her. Recognition, calculation, something colder. Lena didn't look away. She couldn't. Because now they were both standing in the same truth, and only one of them had been hiding it. Daniel gave a small, almost amused smile. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked. No one answered immediately. Because suddenly, the room wasn't just about saving a life anymore. It was about something else, something darker. Something that had been sitting quietly at the edge of everything, and had finally stepped into the light. Lena's heart beat steady now. Not fast, not panicked, steady, because the truth was out. But the real confrontation was only just beginning. Daniel Reeves stepped fully into the room, closing the distance with the same calm confidence he always carried. His shoes made no sound on the polished floor, but somehow, every person in that room felt his presence. It wasn't authority, it was control. "What seems to be the problem?" he repeated, his eyes moving casually from face to face. No one answered right away. Not because they didn't know what to say, because they were choosing how to say it. "Doctor." Reynolds straightened slightly, regaining some of the composure he had lost moments earlier. "We've identified a contaminant," he said carefully. "Something introduced through a topical source." Daniel's gaze flickered, just for a fraction of a second. Too fast for most. Not for Lena. Her eyes stayed on him, unblinking. He knows. The thought landed with certainty. Daniel tilted his head slightly, as if considering the information. "A contaminant," he said. "That's concerning." His voice was smooth, measured, perfectly controlled, but there was something underneath it now, something that didn't quite match the words. Lena stepped forward. Not much, just enough. "It's the hand cream," she said. The room shifted again. Daniel's eyes moved to her. This time there was no pretending, no dismissal, no overlooking. He saw her now, fully. And in that moment, something passed between them. Recognition. "You're the one," he said quietly. Not a question, a statement. Lena didn't respond. She didn't need to. The truth was already sitting in the space between them. Dr. Patel stepped in, his voice firmer now. "We're sending the product for full analysis. Initial tests confirm heavy metal presence." Daniel nodded slowly. "Is that so?" Still calm, still composed. But his fingers tightened ever so slightly at his side. Lena saw it. The first crack. Dr. Reynolds moved closer to Daniel, his tone sharper now. "We'll need to ask you some questions. You've been bringing this product in regularly." Another pause. Short, controlled. Then Daniel smiled. Small, polite. "Of course," he said. "Anything to help." Too easy. Too smooth. Lena's chest tightened. He's not surprised. He's adjusting. The realization came fast. This wasn't someone caught off guard. This was someone calculating his next move. A nurse stepped forward with the sealed container holding the cream. "We've secured the item," she said. Daniel glanced at it briefly, then back at Lena. "You've been very observant," he said. His tone was different now. No longer dismissive, not even neutral. There was something almost curious in it, like he was studying her, trying to understand where she came from, how she had seen what others hadn't. Lena held his gaze. "I pay attention," she said, the same words she had given Reynolds, but this time they carried something else. A warning. Daniel's smile didn't fade, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I can see that," he replied. Behind them, a sudden movement broke the tension. Richard's monitor beeped louder, stronger. A nurse leaned in quickly. "He's responding. Slight improvement." Oh, all eyes turned. For a moment, the focus shifted back to the man in the bed. The man who had nearly died without knowing why. The man who still didn't know who had been standing beside him. Helping. Hurting. Watching. When the room turned back again, Something had changed. Not just in the doctors, in the space itself. Because now, this wasn't just a medical case. It was something else entirely. Dr. Reynolds looked at Daniel again. His expression was no longer uncertain. It was direct. "We'll need to review all visitor logs," he said, "and security footage." Daniel nodded. Of course, still calm, still cooperative. But Lena saw it again. That flicker, that calculation. He's thinking ahead. Her heart steadied. Because she knew something now. This wasn't over. Not even close. And whatever happened next, it wouldn't stay inside this room. A security officer appeared in the doorway, speaking quietly to Dr. Reynolds. Reynolds listened, then nodded once. Understood. He turned back to the room. "Until we have full confirmation," he said, "we proceed carefully." Carefully. The word echoed, because everyone understood what it meant. This wasn't just about medicine anymore. It was about liability. Reputation. Power. And Lena stood right in the middle of it. A woman who had walked in unseen and now couldn't be ignored. Daniel took a step back. Not retreating. Repositioning. "I'll be available for any questions," he said. Then he turned toward the door. But before he left, he paused, just for a second, and looked at Lena again. Not with curiosity this time, not with surprise, with something colder, something sharper. A silent acknowledgement. "You saw too much." Lena didn't move, didn't look away. Because she understood something just as clearly. He knew she wasn't going to stop, and she knew he wasn't going to either. The door closed behind him with a soft click. And just like that, the room exhaled. But Lena didn't. Because the truth had surfaced. But the danger hadn't passed. It had just changed shape. And now, for the first time since this began, everyone in that room knew it. No one said it out loud. But it was there. In the way they stood. In the way they looked at each other. In the way they avoided looking at Lena for just a second too long. Because something had shifted that couldn't be undone. Not just the diagnosis. Not just the danger. The hierarchy. Dr. Reynolds turned slowly, his gaze settling back on Richard Whitmore. The man in the bed was still fragile, still pale, still suspended somewhere between fading and fighting. But now, there was a direction. A path forward. "Begin full detox protocol," Reynolds said, his voice steady again, but not the same. "And isolate any further exposure. No outside items enter this room without clearance." "Yes, doctor," a nurse responded immediately. The room moved again. Purposeful, focused, alive. Lena stood back, watching it unfold. Not leading it, not part of it, but no longer outside of it either. She felt something strange settle in her chest. Not relief. Not yet. Something quieter. Like a storm that had passed through, but hadn't fully cleared. Behind her, someone spoke softly. "You should sit." She turned. Dr. Patel stood there, holding a chair slightly away from the wall, offering it. To her. The gesture was small, simple, but it meant everything. Because no one had ever offered her a place in this room before. Lena hesitated for just a second. Then she shook her head. I'm okay, she said. Her voice was calm, grounded. Patel nodded, but his expression stayed with her a moment longer. Respect. Real. Unfiltered. It felt unfamiliar. Across the room, Dr. Reynolds finished issuing instructions, then turned back toward her again. This time there was no irritation, no dismissal, just something heavier, more complicated. We'll need a full statement, he said. Lena nodded once. I understand. He paused, then added, quieter. You did the right thing. The words landed differently than everything else that had been said to her in that building. Because they weren't defensive, they weren't reluctant. They were honest. Lena didn't respond right away. She just held his gaze, then nodded again. I wasn't trying to be right, she said. I was trying to stop it. Reynolds exhaled slowly. I know, he said. And for the first time, he really did. A sudden movement from the bed pulled everyone's attention again. Richard's hand twitched. Stronger this time. Intentional. A nurse leaned in quickly. Sir, can you hear me? The monitor shifted. A subtle change. But enough. Hope. Real hope. Lena felt her breath catch. Just for a moment. Because this was why she had done it. Not for recognition, not for validation, for this. The chance that he might make it. That he wouldn't disappear without anyone understanding why. Across the room, Doctor. Patel let out a quiet breath. He's responding, he said. No one celebrated, not yet. But the tension cracked just enough to let something else in. Possibility. The door opened again. This time, not Daniel. Security. 2 officers stepped inside, speaking quietly with Dr. Reynolds. Their tone was different, serious, focused. Reynolds listened, then nodded once. Understood, he said. He turned back toward the room. We'll be coordinating with external authorities, he said. No one discusses this case outside this unit. Eyes moved, glances exchanged. Because everyone understood what that meant. This wasn't staying inside the hospital anymore. Lena stood still, watching, listening, feeling the shift ripple outward. What had started as something invisible was now impossible to contain. Her gaze drifted back to Richard. His breathing had steadied slightly. His face still pale, still worn, but not fading the same way. Not slipping, not disappearing. She stepped closer again. Slow. Careful. No one stopped her. No one questioned her. She reached the bedside and adjusted the blanket once more. A small gesture. The same one she had done before. But now, it meant something different. Because this time she wasn't invisible. This time everyone saw her do it. Lena looked down at him. You're still here, she whispered softly. Her voice was barely there, but she meant it. Because so much of this had come down to that one truth. Still here. Still a chance. She stepped back again, giving space as the nurses moved in. And for a moment, she just stood there. In the same room she had cleaned 100 times. The same space where she had been overlooked, dismissed, ignored, and now seen. Not just for what she did, but for what she knew. For what she refused to ignore. Across the room, Dr. Reynolds spoke quietly with security. Dr. Patel reviewed data again, double-checking what they had found. The nurses moved with purpose. And Lena turned toward the door. Not running, not retreating, just moving forward. Because something inside her had changed. Not everything. Her life outside this building was still the same. Her job, her apartment, her routine. But something fundamental had shifted. The way the world saw her, and more importantly, the way she saw herself. She reached the doorway and paused for just a second, looking back. At the room, at the people, at the man who might live because she chose not to look away. Then she stepped out into the hallway. The lights felt brighter. The air felt clearer. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel invisible walking through it. Because the truth had been spoken. The danger had been named. And the person no one saw had changed everything. Without asking, without permission. Just by refusing to ignore what everyone else had missed. When Lena Brooks stepped forward and said, "He's being poisoned," in a room full of doctors who had overlooked the truth, she didn't just save a life, she forced the world to finally see her. This story reminds us that one moment of courage can outweigh years of silence, and that doing the right thing doesn't require permission, only conviction. Sometimes the difference between life and loss is the one person willing to speak when everyone else stays quiet. So today, think about one moment in your life where you held back, where you saw something wasn't right but chose to stay silent. What if you did what Lena did and stepped forward instead? If this story touched you, comment one below. Have you ever seen something others missed but weren't sure if you should speak up? Tell me your story. I'd love to read it. And in the next video, you'll see what happens when kindness meets someone who was never meant to be saved.